The night of my sister's engagement was supposed to be the happiest family moment, but it was the night I realized my father had betrayed me. The night of my sister's engagement was dressed in light. Every corner of our family home glowed with warm bulbs strung along the banisters, soft candles flickering in crystal holders, and laughter rising like music from the living room where relatives gathered. The scent of roasted chicken, cinnamon rolls, and champagne floated through the air, weaving together a picture-perfect celebration. Everyone seemed wrapped in joy, faces bright, voices spilling stories, glasses clinking in harmony. I stood in the middle of it, my hands clutching the fabric of my dress as I tried to absorb the moment, tried to feel the joy I was expected to share. My sister, radiant in her pale gold gown, looked like she belonged in one of those glossy bridal magazines. Her fiancé hovered protectively by her side, eyes brimming with pride. It should have been the happiest night of her life, and in many ways it was. But for me, it became the night everything I thought I knew about my family began to unravel. As I leaned against the staircase railing, I watched my father move through the crowd with the kind of charisma that made people instinctively part to let him pass. He was in his element, shoulders squared, a smile fixed across his face as if nothing could tarnish the image of a man who had built his life on respect and reputation. All my life I had known him as the man who boasted about raising daughters who were his pride. He would tell his friends at work, at church, at neighborhood barbecues, "My girls are my legacy." And I believed him. I built my dreams on that pride, on the sense that my father's strength meant I had the freedom to grow, to become, to step into a future of my own making. Tonight, though, something was different. The way he carried himself seemed forced, his smile stretched too wide, his eyes darting too often to the corners of the room where whispers clustered like shadows. I wanted to dismiss it as nerves, the natural tension of hosting a grand event, but deep down, something unsettled me. I glanced at my sister, glowing with happiness, and for a fleeting moment, jealousy pricked my heart, not because I begrudged her joy, but because I felt the strange absence of it. Promise of family. We celebrate the future she and Daniel will build together, and the strength of the foundation that has been laid for them. His words were rich, his delivery polished. Guests nodded, smiled, even dabbed at their eyes. But as I watched, I noticed the faint tremor in his hand, the way his throat tightened around the word future. Our family has always believed in sacrifice, he continued, in giving so that others may rise higher. And tonight I am proud to say that I have given everything necessary for my daughter's happiness. The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time the words clawed at me. Sacrifice. Given everything. The phrases swirled in my mind with a sharpness that left me dizzy. I caught my mother's face across the room. She smiled, but it was the brittle kind, her knuckles white around her glass. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself I was reading too much into it. But as the toast ended and my father drank deeply from his glass, I heard it. The hushed whispers threading through the room like smoke. Used up everything. Poor other girl. How will she manage now? Their words weren't meant for me, but they reached me anyway, slicing through the music and laughter. I turned sharply, but the cousins and aunts who had been speaking dropped their eyes, their smiles stretching too wide when they realized I had heard. I forced a laugh, pretending I hadn't noticed, but inside my stomach knotted. I excused myself from the crowd and slipped down the hallway toward the kitchen, needing air, needing distance from the performance unfolding in the living room. The kitchen was quiet, dim compared to the brightness outside. I leaned against the counter, pressing my palms to the cool marble, trying to steady my breath. I thought about my father's words, his toast, his declaration of sacrifice, and the way pride had cracked into something else in his eyes. My memories flickered. The way he had promised me he'd put money aside for my college. The way he had assured me I wouldn't have to worry, that my dreams would be safe. He had always said, "Education is the one inheritance I'll never let slip." But if he had spent everything, if he had given everything, what did that mean for me? What happens when she learns what you did with her future? There was a silence for a long moment. Then my father's voice again, lower, edged with something I had never heard before. She doesn't need to. My chest constricted. My vision blurred. The words echoed in my head. What you did with her. It was me. They were talking about me. I staggered back, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a stone. The laughter from the living room felt miles away now, a cruel soundtrack to the betrayal unraveling in the shadows of my own home. I pressed a hand to my mouth, holding back a sob, and realized in that moment that everything I thought was secure, my plans, my dreams, my future, was no longer mine. My father had taken it, spent it, sacrificed it, all for the sake of tonight's glittering celebration. The music swelled again from the other room, voices rising in cheer, but inside me the world had cracked. And as I stepped away from the pantry door, my heart pounding, one truth settled deep into my bones. This night wasn't just about my sister's joy. It was the night my father's betrayal came to light, and I had no idea how far it would go, or how much more I was about to lose. While everyone clapped for my sister's ring, I caught a sentence that shattered me. Well, at least now her college fund was put to good use. The applause was still rolling like distant thunder from the living room when those words slipped past 2 champagne flutes and found me. I didn't even see who said it. An aunt, a cousin, one of the neighbors who came because our family throws the kind of parties people talk about all year. But the sentence landed with the force of a car crash. At least now her college fund was put to good use. The syllables didn't compute at first. They layered over the room's glitter, the string lights and floral centerpieces and the harpist plucking something soft in the corner, and they refused to make sense. My mind tried to file them as a misunderstanding, a bad joke, the kind of clumsy remark people make when they drink on an empty stomach. But the words curled like smoke in my chest and would not dissipate. I stood there, suspended between the woman taking photographs of my sister's left hand and the server offering a tray of canapes I suddenly felt too nauseous.
Signing a contract in invisible ink. It wasn't only money he promised, it was a horizon he painted in detail. A campus of brick and trees, a dorm room with posters and textbooks, late-night study sessions that were not weighed down by a second job. It was independence. It was breath. I had saved dreams like other girls saved ticket stubs. I collected brochures and circled course lists, ran my fingers over maps of cities I wanted to call home. I pictured myself working in a studio flooded with morning light, or a clinic where my name hung on a badge, or a newsroom that smelled faintly of coffee and deadlines. When I worked weekends, when I tutored after school, when I turned down trips because every dollar felt like a vote for the life I wanted, I did it with a kind of fierce joy, because there was a promise with my father's name on it anchoring me to the future I could almost touch. So when that stray sentence drifted through the laughter and lodged in my ear, it scraped against every memory I had of those nights, every careful plan I'd stacked like fragile glassware in a cabinet I believed no one would touch. My first reaction wasn't even rage. It was confusion so sharp it felt like grief. I looked for my father and found him near the fireplace, centre stage in the way only he can be, shoulder to shoulder with the future in-laws, playing host, absorbing praise. He laughed, a sound I knew so well I could predict the cadence, but tonight there was a split-second lag, an almost imperceptible pause before the sound arrived, like something in him needed to spool up. He rested his hand on my sister's shoulder, squeezed it, and the gesture looked exactly like love from 20 feet away. From where I stood, it looked like performance. I thought about the pantry whisper I'd overheard, what you did with her future, and the sound in my aunt's voice when she'd said she'll find out. It was as if those words had primed something in me, a fuse I didn't know existed. Suddenly, every glance in the room felt coded. The sympathetic press of my grandmother's best friend's lips when our eyes met. The way 2 cousins stopped mid-sentence when I approached and then started a new conversation too bright, too fast. The music swelled. The harpist smiled. And I felt
Dark, I slipped inside, closed the door, and pressed my back against it. The mirror over the sink captured my face and returned to me a version I barely recognized. Eyes bright with humiliation.
mouth trying to hold its shape. I thought of my sister's hand held up in the living room, the room erupting in applause as the diamond flared and settled, the ring itself a small planet around which the whole evening orbited. I thought of the desserts my mother had ordered from the fancy patisserie downtown, the garden transformed with rented heaters and rented chairs and rented joy. My stomach turned. I leaned over the sink and braced my palms on the cool porcelain, inhaling slowly, begging my body for calm. In the better versions of stories like this, the bathroom is a sanctuary. In mine, it felt like a witness. The white tiles, scrubbed to a sheen that reflected the light in unforgiving lines, made my dress look louder, my skin more fragile. I tried to blink away the hot sting collecting behind my eyes and failed. The first tears spilled fast, surprising me in their speed. I didn't sob, not yet. The crying came like a fracture line, a single crack that spread and spread until the whole thing gave way. I gripped the soap dish because otherwise I would have slid to the floor. I did not let myself be loud. The party was right outside, and the last thing I could bear was someone knocking to ask if I was all right. I pressed the towel against my mouth and made the kind of sound that doesn't travel. I remembered the envelope my father had handed me when I chose a school. A token, he had said, and the check inside had covered the deposit and the first round of books. He'd said it with a smile pulled tight at the edges, the way people smile when the photographer says one more, and I had believed the rest was waiting. I remembered asking him last month whether we should sit down and map out the payment schedule, the deadlines financial aid offices set like traps, and he had waved a hand. Your sister's engagement first, he'd said. Then we'll pull the paperwork. You worry too much. The way I read it then was reassurance. The way I read it now was delay. When the tears slowed, I turned on the faucet and ran cold water over my wrists until summer, the shade we decided made the hallway feel taller. Yes, I said, and my voice did not betray me. I was proud of that. I'll be out in a minute. Silence. Then her footsteps, retreating. I pictured her palm pressed against the door for a few seconds, the way she does when she wants to say more and can't. My mother has made a life of swallowing what is unsayable. It has kept us afloat in ways I suspect I will discover in the worst possible ways. It has also made me very good at reading empty spaces. When I emerged, the hallway felt narrower. My mother stood at the end of it, the party at her back like a tidal force rolling and rolling. She looked at me in that assessing way, a scan that starts at the shoes and slides up to the eyes. I could tell she was cataloging the brightness of my nose, the slight swell around my lashes, evidence to be swept away before an aunt cornered me with a camera. You all right? She asked. The question came hushed, the way one whispers in museums and hospitals. The kind you ask when you hope the answer is yes, because a no will make the floor tilt. I'm fine, I said. It came out too quickly, and we both heard it. Just needed a minute. I wanted her to take the invitation I was laying like a trap and ask me what I really meant. I wanted her to close the distance and say, I know. But she only nodded, smoothed a hand over my shoulder in a gesture so brief it barely registered as comfort, and said, Good. They're about to bring out the cake. We walked back into the living room together, and if you had taken a photograph, it would have looked like unity. The cake was a 3-tiered dream in pale buttercream, edged in little sugared pearls, the kind of thing that arrives in a white van and costs as much as a second-hand car. People made the right sounds. My sister laughed, giddy and luminous, and her fiancé tucked a stray hair behind her ear like he had practiced. My father lifted a knife with a flourish, guided her hand while everyone counted down as if the act were a performance ritual none of us could leave before the last note. He caught my eye then, over the ridge of sugar roses. Only for a second. If you blinked, you would have missed it, but I didn't blink. The look that crossed his face was not guilt. Guilt requires a concession to the hurt of another. The sound system, when someone turns the dial just beyond the sweet spot, and the treble gets sharp enough. It was a choreography, and every dancer knew their step. If this had been a film,
the soundtrack would have dropped into a low hum designed to make the audience. I tried to tell myself to wait. Do not explode here, with rented chairs and layered cake and a cousin FaceTiming. Do not become the story people tell about the night the engagement party went up in. Wait until the last glass is washed and the last light is turned off, and ask the question the way you would in a deposition. Was my college fund used to pay for this? But behind that measured plan, something primal scratched. The part of me that still believed in the version of my father who pressed my hand to the table and promised me a horizon, wanted to storm the DJ's little corner and shut down the music and force the house to listen. The part of me that has learned our family speaks in whispers told me that if I did, the story would become about my volume, not about his choices. I stepped onto the back patio to breathe. The garden looked beautiful, objectively. Lanterns hung like soft moons over the hedges. Heaters ticked as they cycled. Tablecloths fluttered in a polite wind. I thought about how much it costs to make beauty look effortless. I thought about tuition bills broken into neat monthly amounts designed to feel palatable until you do the math. I thought about how long it takes to rebuild trust when someone has converted it without your consent into a party budget. My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down at the screen, grateful for a distraction, grateful for a voice that didn't smell like gardenias and diplomacy. It was my best friend, Mia. We have been writing each other from bathroom floors since middle school. We narrate our lives with the urgency of people who know that if you don't tell your version first, another narrative will get there ahead of you and make itself comfortable. I swiped open the message, expecting a heart-eyed text about my sister's dress or a joke about the harpist looking like he'd been cast from Central Orchestral Casting. What I found instead made my knees loosen like they were forgetting there was ground. Is it true your dad used your money for this party? The sentence stood because a part of me still wanted to believe this could be solved with a simple correction and a laugh we could hate ourselves for later. But the pantry whisper was now a chorus. The aunt's phrase was now a headline. And my father's brief, cold glance over sugar roses was now the closing argument. I didn't answer her. Not yet. I stared at the question blinking up at me and realized that before I could respond to the outside world, I had to ask the question inside my own house and listen to whatever answer tried to dress itself in love. The question on my phone screen burned hotter than the diamond on my sister's finger. The words stared back at me, glowing against the dark patio. Is it true your dad used your money for this party? For a second, I thought my vision blurred from the string lights swaying overhead. But it wasn't the lights, it was my own pulse surging against my eyes. I had avoided the truth in whispers. I had pushed down suspicion and smoothed it with excuses. But once that question appeared, typed out by my best friend, it was real. If she had heard it, others had too. This wasn't just an echo bouncing in the walls of my head. It was gossip circulating through the veins of my community. I slipped back inside, the noise of laughter and clinking glasses rushing at me like a wave. My sister still stood radiant at the centre of it all, her hand raised so every cousin and co-worker could admire the diamond catching every angle of light. Her cheeks were pink with happiness, her laugh brighter than I had heard in years. She looked like someone stepping into a dream she'd been waiting for, and all I could think was that the cost of her dream might have been the death of mine. My phone buzzed again, another message from Mia. I didn't want to believe it. But people are saying your dad bragged that he handled the whole engagement with money meant to be wasted on tuition. Please tell me it's not true. My stomach twisted. Bragged. Tuition as waste. I had no reply. Instead, I stood in the doorway of our living room, the house filled with rented joy, and studied my father. He was surrounded by men in suits, his laughter reaching the ceiling beams, but his face betrayed him in ways only a daughter who had won.
The world was wrapped in roses and cake frosting, in her fiancé's smile, and the way her friends crowded around her, shrieking at the size of the ring. I couldn't blame her for being happy, but I couldn't shake the sting that her happiness had been purchased by my sacrifice, by the promise that had been stolen from me without a word.
Every conversation I overheard now felt poisoned. An uncle clapped my father on the back. "You really went all out for this one, huh?" My father laughed, but I heard the edge beneath it. An older cousin whispered near the punch bowl, "Guess college doesn't matter much when there's a wedding to fund." Each line sliced into me until I couldn't tell if my chest ached from fury or heartbreak. I excused myself again, slipping into the kitchen. The house smelled of champagne and buttercream, of expensive catering, of celebration layered over secrets. I pressed my palms against the countertop, grounding myself. If I confronted him here, in front of everyone, I would become the spectacle, the ungrateful daughter accused of ruining her sister's night. They would turn on me before he ever had to answer. No, I had to wait. But waiting meant every second stretched into torture. The way my father smiled at my sister's fiancé felt like betrayal. The way my mother avoided my eyes, fussing endlessly with plates, felt like complicity. I thought of those nights at the dining table when he promised, "Your future is safe." I thought of the brochures I kept under my bed, pages worn thin by hope. My throat burned. When the last slice of cake was served and the last photograph taken, guests began to filter out into the night. My sister hugged me tightly, her perfume sweet against my cheek. "Isn't it beautiful?" she whispered, glancing back at the decorated garden. I nodded because I couldn't bear to taint her joy, but inside, my silence screamed. By the time the lights dimmed and the house settled into the kind of stillness that follows too much laughter, I was still wide awake. My parents disappeared into their room, my sister left with her fiancé, and I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan whirring above me. The question from Mia repeated like a drumbeat in my skull. Is it true? I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe in this house where everything looked the same but nothing was the same. So I rose. Barefoot, I crept down the hallway. Were stacked neatly along the edges, his handwriting labeling each one with precision. I had no map, no plan, but I knew what I was looking for. Proof. I rifled through folders, each one filled with tax returns, old receipts, property documents. My heart pounded louder with every drawer I pulled, certain each sound would wake him. Then, at the bottom of the locked cabinet he had forgotten to close properly, I found them. Bank statements. Pages of withdrawals circled in red pen. Dates that matched the months leading up to the engagement party. Large sums, drained from the very account I had been told was mine. The college fund. My college fund. My hands trembled as I held them up to the lamp's dim light. The numbers didn't lie. The account was nearly empty. And tucked beneath the stack, as if hidden too hastily, was an invoice. Not from a university or a savings plan. From the event company that had decorated our house, rented the heaters, provided the cake. My name was on the withdrawal slip. My father's signature on the authorization. My vision blurred, rage and devastation mixing until I couldn't separate them. He hadn't just borrowed it, he had spent it. Spent my future to fund a night of glitter and champagne, to bask in praise while I suffocated in silence. The house creaked. I froze, clutching the papers, listening. Footsteps in the hallway. A door opening down the corridor. My father's cough, low and heavy. I shoved the papers back into the drawer, but one slipped in my haste, fluttering to the floor. My heart leapt as I bent to snatch it, every nerve on fire. The footsteps drew closer. And as the door handle rattled, I realized I wasn't just trespassing in his study. I was about to be caught with proof of his betrayal in my hands. The knob turned and the door began to open. The bank statements told a story my father never meant me to see. My hands trembled as I stared at the columns of numbers printed in black and white. The withdrawals weren't small, accidental, or spread across years the way I might have hoped. They were massive sums, drained one after another in the span of weeks, and each date matched perfectly with the preparations for my sister's engagement, the venue deposit, the catering order, the decorations that still hung for
Help? But your fund guarantees the rest. Summer spent working double shifts at the diner, every tip saved for extras, so I wouldn't touch the money he said was safe. Friends who took road trips while I stayed behind, telling myself the sacrifice was worth it, because one day I would step onto a campus debt-free,
proud of the life I had built with his help. And now, all of that was gone. I felt rage rise thick and hot, curling into my chest until I could hardly breathe. But beneath the rage was humiliation, because while I had trusted, while I had believed his promises, he had already decided I wasn't worth keeping them. He had looked at me, his daughter, his blood, and chosen someone else's celebration over my future. I wanted to scream, but the sound froze in my throat when the door creaked open. My mother stood in the frame. Her eyes flicked to the desk, to the papers spread across it, to my shaking hands. A silence stretched between us, taut and brittle. "You shouldn't be in here," she said quietly, her voice sharper than I had expected. "Then explain it," I shot back, my voice cracking with fury. "Explain why the account is empty. Explain why the money I've been counting on since I was old enough to understand the word college is gone." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't move closer. She didn't even glance at the statements again. "This isn't the time," she said finally, almost whispering. "Not the time?" My laugh came out broken, jagged. "When is the time, Mom? After the party's over and my life's in ruins? After you've decided it's easier to keep smiling than to tell me my own father betrayed me?" Her eyes glistened, but she didn't answer. The silence hurt more than words could. "Did you know?" I demanded. "Did you stand by while he stole everything from me?" Her fingers tightened on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought she would break, thought she would spill the truth that trembled just beneath her lips. But instead, she shook her head once, as though silencing herself, and turned away. "Go to bed," she murmured, her voice clipped, before closing the door between us. The sound of the latch clicking was louder than thunder. I stood frozen, staring at the wood, my fists clenched so tightly the paper crumpled in my hand. Her refusal, trying to steady my breath. That was when I noticed it. Beneath the stack of bank statements, tucked at the very bottom of the drawer, was an envelope. My father's handwriting didn't mark it, nor did it bear the bank stamp. It was addressed to someone else, someone closer, my mother. The envelope was already slit open, the flap tucked in as though it had been read more than once. Inside was a single letter. The words were typed, formal, but my eyes caught immediately on one phrase that twisted my stomach into knots. "Regarding repayment of debt." My breath caught. Debt. Not investment, not savings, not family finances. Debt. And the letter was written not by a bank, but by a name I didn't recognize. A private one. I slid it back into the drawer, my heart pounding louder than the crickets outside the window. Suddenly, my father's betrayal wasn't just about spending my money on a party. There was something bigger, darker, threaded beneath it all. And whatever it was tied to my mother, too. As I slipped out of the study, the letter's words echoed in my ears. Repayment of debt. And for the first time, I wondered if my future had been stolen not just for a party, but to cover up something far more dangerous. The word debt turned my anger into terror. Until that moment, I had believed my father's betrayal was about favoritism. He had stolen my college fund to make my sister's engagement spectacular. He had traded my future for her fairy tale. That was bad enough. But the letter in the drawer shifted everything. This wasn't about choosing one daughter over another. This was about survival. His survival. The word debt echoed in my chest like a drumbeat. It wasn't the kind of word that sat neatly in family conversations. It was the kind of word whispered late at night when voices were raised but doors stayed shut. Suddenly, memories came rushing back, fragments I had dismissed as background noise, the muffled arguments I had overheard through my bedroom wall. My mother's voice sharp, my father's lower, strained. The way conversations fell silent when I walked into the kitchen. The time I caught my father gripping his temples at the dining table, muttering about interest and deadlines. At the time, I thought it was the adrenaline of risk while my savings evaporated. Had he borrowed from people outside the law, people who could knock on our door one night and take more than money? Or had he simply miscalculated, making promises he couldn't keep until the hole grew too wide to climb out of? The worst part was not knowing. And then another thought gripped me. My sister's fiancé. His family wasn't just wealthy, they were established, respected, the kind of people who signed contracts with lawyers and shook hands with politicians. Their presence at our house that night, the way my father had beamed, the way he had raised his glass so high, it all clicked. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a transaction, a way to buy time, to buy favor, to cover the debts that were threatening to swallow us whole. And the cost of that transaction had been me, my education, my independence, my chance at a life beyond the shadow of this family. Tears burned hot at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't only betrayal, it was erasure. My father had decided my worth was less than his reputation, less than a business tie wrapped in the disguise of love. My dreams had been bartered away like poker chips, and I hadn't even been told the rules of the game. I stumbled into the bathroom, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles whitened. My reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, a stranger I barely recognized. My chest heaved with every breath. For years I had believed in my father's words, "Your future is secure." And now I could hear the cracks in them, as hollow as broken glass. From the hallway came laughter, clinking glasses, the sound of a family celebrating. It felt cruel, almost obscene. How could they toast to a future built on the ruins of mine? I pressed my palm to the cool mirror, trying to steady myself. But steadiness didn't come. Only questions. If my father was desperate enough to empty my savings, what else was he desperate enough to do? How far had he gone already? How far would he go to keep the truth hidden? Later that night, when the last of the guests had left and the house was finally quiet, I crept back into the hallway. My body moved on instinct, pulled toward the low hum of voices drifting from the study. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of lamplight spilling into the hall. I froze,
Hiding something far more dangerous. And if they were willing to say she can never know the truth, then I was already too close to finding it. But I already knew. And I wanted answers. The study door creaked as I pushed it open. My father looked up from behind his desk, startled, his eyes narrowing as he realized I had heard more than I should have. Papers were scattered across the wood surface, half hidden beneath his hand as though he could shield them with his palm alone. For a long, heavy moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched until I thought it would choke me. Finally, I stepped closer, my voice low, but trembling with the weight of everything I had uncovered. "I heard you. I know what you did." His shoulders stiffened. "Go to bed," he snapped. As if I were still a child, as if the years hadn't turned me into someone capable of piecing together his lies. But I didn't move. "You stole my college fund," I said. "You used it for the engagement, for debt." I found the statements. I found the letter. For an instant, his mask cracked. His jaw clenched. His eyes flicked away. Then he forced a laugh, cold, dismissive. "You don't understand what you're talking about." "Yes, I do." My voice broke, but I held my ground. "It was my future. You promised me. You told me every time I worked late shifts, every time I pulled an A, every time I said no to fun so I could focus, you told me my future was secure, and then you spent it all." His hand slammed against the desk, making me flinch. "Enough!" His voice was sharp, shaking the air. "You think life is that simple? You think money sits waiting forever, untouched, while the world comes to take everything from you?" My chest burned. "So you just took it, without asking, without telling me?" His eyes hardened, and I saw something in them I had never seen before. Fear wrapped in anger. "I had no choice," he said finally, each word bitten off like it pained him. "It was either your money or losing everything. The house, the family name, everything I built." The words struck like ice. He wasn't denying it anymore. He was justifying it. "Losing everything?" My voice cracked. "You mean losing your pride, your reputation? That's what this is about. You didn't family's future. Her fiancé's family has resources, influence. That means stability. You want to talk about college? About your career? None of that matters if the family crumbles. Sometimes you have to think bigger than yourself." I stared at him, disbelief clawing through my chest. Bigger than myself? My entire life you told me to dream,
to work hard, to make something of myself. And now you're telling me none of that matters because you wanted a party and a contract dressed as an engagement? His hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "Watch your tone," he warned. But I didn't stop. The dam had broken, and years of trust, pride, and faith in him spilled out like poison. You raised me to believe you were my protector, my guide, the man who wanted the best for me. But you weren't protecting me, you were using me. You took what I worked for and traded it for your own mistakes. You betrayed me. The word hung heavy in the air. Betrayed. His jaw clenched again, but something flickered across his face, a shadow of guilt, a hesitation. For the first time, I wondered if part of him hated himself for what he had done. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by steel. "You don't know the weight I carry," he said. His voice trembled with something darker than anger, something almost desperate. "You don't know the enemies waiting for me to stumble, the debts clawing at our name. Everything I do for this family. You think you're the only one who's lost something? We've all lost, but at least this way we stay standing." I could barely breathe. Staying standing isn't the same as being whole. For a moment, silence stretched again, heavy and suffocating. My father's eyes drilled into mine, searching for submission, for that obedient daughter he thought he had raised. But I didn't look away. I couldn't. Finally, his voice snapped like a whip. "If you keep digging, you'll destroy this family." The words shook the room. They weren't a warning. They were a command, a threat wrapped in fatherly authority. And as they echoed in my ears, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing the lie he had built. And I had just become the greatest threat to it. The man who raised me as a job I took on weekends, every hour I spent building the future I believed was mine, I carried his pride like a torch. It was the reason I trusted him when he said, "Your future is safe." But now, as I sat curled up on my bed, staring into the dark, those memories felt like ashes. The man who once called me his pride now saw me as a threat. He had stripped me of the future he'd promised, and when I asked for the truth, his warning had been clear. "If you keep digging, you'll destroy this family." I felt destroyed already. In the days that followed, I pulled back from my family, isolating myself in the quiet corners of the house. Where once I would join my sister in helping pick flowers or choosing table settings for her wedding, now I lingered in shadows, my silence louder than any protest. My father avoided my gaze. My mother, brittle and weary, hovered but said nothing. And my sister, my glowing, ecstatic sister, was the only one who seemed to notice my absence. One evening, she slipped into my room as I sat at my desk pretending to read. "You're not yourself," she said gently, her eyes soft but searching. For a moment, I almost told her everything. The missing fund, the debt, the manipulation, the way our father had twisted my life into a bargaining chip for hers. But then I looked at her engagement ring, glittering on her finger like a promise, and I hesitated. Her fiancé's family was wealthy, powerful. What if they weren't just innocent in-laws to be? What if they were part of the arrangement? Part of the reason my father had done what he did? If I told her, would I be protecting her, or would I be throwing her into the same darkness that had swallowed me? So I shook my head and lied. Just tired. Her smile was sad, as though she didn't quite believe me, but she didn't push further. "Well," she whispered, "you've always been the strong one. Just don't forget you don't have to carry everything alone." She left me with those words, and I stared at the closed door, wishing I had the courage to open it and spill the truth. But instead, I let silence hold me captive. That silence carried into dinner the next night. The dining table, usually a place of the front row, watching my family play parts in a script I hadn't agreed to. After dinner, I retreated to my room, the only place I still felt like myself. I powered on my laptop, more out of habit than hope, scrolling through emails and messages. My friends had started to notice my withdrawal. Invitations to outings, study groups, even late-night coffee runs all piled in my inbox unanswered. I couldn't bring myself to explain, not when the truth was so tangled and humiliating. Then one email stopped me cold. The subject line was blank. The sender anonymous. My heart raced as I clicked it open, half expecting spam, half expecting a virus. But it wasn't junk. It was a single attachment, a scanned document. My hands shook as I opened the file. There it was, in black and white, proof. My college fund wasn't just gone, it had been redirected. The statements tied my savings account into a land deal, a transaction under my father's name. And not just any deal. The property records listed shady partners, shell companies, names I didn't recognize but felt dangerous. This wasn't a simple mistake or a desperate withdrawal. This was deliberate. The blood drained from my face. My future had been signed away to fuel something bigger, darker than an engagement party. My father hadn't just betrayed me. He had entangled me in something I barely understood. At the bottom of the document was a note, typed in block letters. "You're asking the wrong questions. Follow the land, and you'll find the truth." I stared at the words, my pulse hammering in my ears. Someone out there knew what had been done. Someone was watching. And if they had sent this to me, it meant they wanted me to keep digging. But digging was the very thing my father had forbidden. And now I had proof he had every reason to be afraid. The attachment in the email showed signatures I recognized, my father's. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The jagged loop of his handwriting, the way his name stretched too wide across the page, the familiar curve of the W in our last name. It was all there, printed in black ink beside official seals. I leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding in my chest. My father's signature was stamped onto a document that didn't just explain.
But the one that made my stomach twist into knots was printed at the very bottom, crisp and deliberate. My sister's fiancé's father. The realization hit like a blow. This engagement wasn't just about love or celebration. It was an alliance, a partnership masked with champagne and laughter. My father had emptied my fund to buy his way into their family, securing land and wealth at the cost of my education, my future. I sat back in my chair, the weight of betrayal pressing into my chest so hard it was difficult to breathe. For weeks I had thought the worst thing my father had done was choose one daughter over another. Now I understood. He hadn't chosen her. He had chosen himself. He had chosen survival, reputation, power, and he had used both of us as bargaining chips. My mind spiraled back to the engagement party, to the way my father had raised his glass with trembling hands. His toast had been dripping with pride, but behind his eyes was something else, relief. That night, while I stood frozen in whispers and shadows, he had been sealing a deal that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with saving himself. Anger boiled in me, hot and consuming, not just at him, but at all of them. My sister's fiancé's family wasn't innocent. They weren't bystanders. They were in on it. They knew where the money had come from. They knew what had been sacrificed. They had smiled across the table, offered congratulations, and pretended it was romance, when it was really business. And my sister, sweet, radiant, blissfully unaware, was walking straight into a marriage that wasn't built on love, but on debt and deceit. My eyes returned to the contract. The language was dense, filled with numbers and clauses, but one line caught my attention and refused to let go. My name, not my father's, mine. There it was, printed clearly, tied to the contract as a beneficiary, as though I had agreed to this arrangement. Except I hadn't. I had never signed, never consented, never even known it existed until now. Yet legally, on paper, I was bound to it. The room seemed to tilt around me. My future hadn't just been stolen, it had been weaponized. My name had been dragged into their scheme, used like currency. If this deal ever came under scrutiny, if it failed or collapsed, it wouldn't just be my father or my uncle standing there in guilt. It would be me. 1,000 thoughts collided in my mind at once. If I confronted contracts, about names, about signatures that could tear our lives apart in courtrooms and headlines, but it was already too late, because I had seen it. I knew the truth. And now, whether I liked it or not, I was part of it. And the contract that should never have had my name on it was the very thing that could ruin me. I wasn't just robbed, I was signed away like property. The moment I saw my name tied to that contract,
My breath turned to ice. But the deeper I studied the pages, the sharper the horror became. The signature beneath it wasn't mine. It looked like mine, almost identical in slant, in pressure, in the little curve of the last letter. But it wasn't. My father hadn't just taken my money. He had forged me. I pressed the paper closer, my eyes darting between the strokes. I had signed countless forms in high school, scholarship applications, permission slips. I knew the rhythm of my own hand, the subtle inconsistencies that made my name mine. But this signature was too clean, too rehearsed, the kind of imitation born from practice. He had studied my handwriting the way a thief studies the lock he intends to pick. The realization made me sick. This wasn't only betrayal of trust. This wasn't only theft. It was erasure. In that moment, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a line of ink, a pawn moved across the board without consent. I thought of the times he had praised me as a child, the way he said my mind was sharp, my future limitless. I thought of the nights I sat at the kitchen table, working late into the evening while he passed behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder, saying he was proud. And all along, he had been preparing to sign my life away when it suited him. The legal implications crushed down on me as I read further. This wasn't just about money already gone. My name tied me to liabilities. If the deal soured, if debts mounted, if lawsuits emerged, I could be dragged under with him. It meant creditors could come after me. Banks could hound me. Courts could see me as responsible for debts I never agreed to. My dreams of college, of independence, of finally carving out a life for myself, they weren't just delayed.
"Tell me this isn't real," I said, dropping the papers onto the table. "Tell me he didn't forge my name." Her eyes widened as she read, but instead of outrage, I saw something worse, recognition. She didn't deny it. She didn't gasp or accuse. She just lowered her gaze as if the shame was too heavy to meet mine. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I don't understand?" My voice cracked, anger spilling over. "He stole my future. He forged my name. This isn't just about money, Mom. It's a crime. I could go to jail for this if anyone looks too closely." She reached for my hand, but I yanked it back. Her lips trembled. "He didn't do it to hurt you. He did it to save us." The words made me laugh bitterly. Save us? By signing me into debt? By turning me into collateral? Her silence was answer enough. I turned, heading for the door, my chest burning with fury. "I'm going to a lawyer. I'll show them this. I'll get out of it." But before I reached the hallway, her voice rose, sharp and desperate. "If you do that, you'll destroy everything." I froze, my back stiff. She stood now, her chair screeching against the tile, her face pale and frantic. "You don't know what's at stake. If you expose this, it won't just be your father. It'll be all of us. We'll lose everything, our home, his business, your sister's marriage. The whole family will fall apart." For a moment, I stared at her, uncomprehending. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew all along." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The betrayal spread deeper. No longer just my father's hand forging my name, but my mother's silence binding me in place. Together they had trapped me, turning me into a prisoner inside my own family. I stumbled upstairs, the papers crumpled in my fist, my chest tight with grief and rage. I felt cornered, with no way out. The people who were supposed to protect me were the very ones chaining me to their lies. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling while the house groaned in the wind. My mind replayed every childhood memory, twisting them into something darker, erased like the rest of her. But here was one, hidden, waiting. And on the very first page, in words that made my blood run cold, she had written, "Betrayal repeats it. What they did to me, they will do to her." The journal warned me, blood can betray you deeper than any stranger. I stared at those words, written in my grandmother's looping cursive.
the ink faded, but the warning sharp as a knife. My chest ached as I traced the letters with my fingertip, as though touching them could connect me to her across time. She had known. She had carried the same wounds I now bore, the same betrayal carved into her by the very people meant to love her. The house felt heavier after that discovery. The walls seemed to lean inward, as if the past itself were pressing against me, demanding I face what I had been born into. The betrayal I felt wasn't just about my father forging my name, or about my mother's silence. It was older, deeper, a sickness that had been passed down, like blood. When morning came, I found my mother sitting in the living room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting her face into stripes of light and shadow. I held the journal in my hands like evidence. She looked at it and closed her eyes, as though she had been waiting for this moment. "You found hers," she said quietly. My throat tightened. "You knew?" Her gaze fell to the carpet, and for the first time, I saw her not as the woman who had always stood in the background of my father's choices, but as someone who had carried her own chain of silence. "I grew up knowing," she whispered. "Your grandmother tried to warn me too. She wrote everything down because she knew words on paper couldn't be twisted the way voices could. But I was young, scared. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I played along, maybe it would all pass me by." The confession cracked something inside me. "So you let it happen. You let him take my future, just like he took hers." Her face crumpled. "It wasn't just him," she said, her voice shaking. "It never was. Your grandfather started it. The deals, the shortcuts, the manipulations. Our family's wealth wasn't built on hard work and honesty. It was built on cutting corners, on buying silence, on pushing anyone who stood in the way aside. Your father, he just carried it on." Shame etched into every line of her face. "I wanted to protect you. I thought if you stayed away from the books, the papers, if you focused on your studies, maybe you'd escape it. But he couldn't let you. He needed your name, your future, just like he needed mine once. And I was too weak to stop him." I gripped the journal tighter, the leather digging into my palms. My grandmother had tried to speak, to leave behind the truth. My mother had chosen silence, and I was left to pay the price. "I hate him for what he did," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But I don't know if I hate you more, for knowing and letting it happen anyway." She flinched as though I had struck her, her hands clenching together until her knuckles turned white. "I deserve that," she said softly. "But I swear to you, I thought I was protecting you. I thought silence was safer than truth. I thought—" Her voice broke and she pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. I wanted to scream, to tear the walls down around us. Instead, I opened the journal to a page where my grandmother had written, "The women in this family always pay, until one of us refuses." The weight of those words pressed into my chest. I couldn't undo what had been done. My college fund was gone. My name was tied to a contract I never signed. My father saw me as collateral, and my mother saw me as someone to protect by silence. But my grandmother had seen me as something more, the one who could refuse. My hands shook as I closed the book. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. My mother sat across from me, tears streaking her face, her shoulders bowed under the weight of her choices. For the first time, I realized she wasn't my ally, but she wasn't my enemy either. She was just another woman broken by the same chain I was now caught in. The sound of footsteps broke the fragile silence. Light, careful, hesitant. I turned, and there in the doorway stood my sister. Her hair was still curled from the night before, her engagement ring glinting on her finger as the morning sun caught it. Her expression was confused, her brow furrowed as her eyes darted between the journal in my hands, the papers on the table, and the tear-streaked face of our mother.
Surrounded her since the engagement ring slid onto her finger just days ago was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling but edged with defiance. "What are you talking about?" I swallowed hard, the words burning in my throat. "Our father used my college fund to pay for your engagement party. And not just that. He signed my name onto contracts I never agreed to. He sold my future for this." The silence after my confession was brutal.
I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the uneven rhythm of my own breathing. My sister's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at me as though she had just seen a ghost standing in her childhood home. Finally, she whispered, "That's not true." But even as she said it, I saw the doubt in her eyes, the way her hand fidgeted with her engagement ring. "Look at the papers," I said, thrusting the journal and the contract toward her. "Look at his signature. Look at mine. My forged signature. He didn't just betray me. He used me like currency to buy you this fairy tale." Her face crumpled, her lips trembling. "You think I asked for this? You think I wanted him to do that?" The anger that had been simmering in me for weeks boiled over. "No, but you're benefiting from it. You're wearing my future on your hand. Every smile, every toast, every moment of your happiness, it's built on what he stole from me." Her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head violently, curls bouncing against her cheeks. "Don't do this. Don't put this on me. I didn't know." "Didn't you?" I snapped. "Didn't you hear the whispers? Didn't you see the way people looked at me while you twirled around in your new dress? Didn't you wonder how he could afford all of this when he's been drowning in debt?" The words cut through the room like shards of glass. My sister pressed her palms to her ears as if she could block out the truth. "Stop!" she cried. "Just stop!" My mother sat silently on the couch, her face pale, her eyes distant, as if she couldn't bear to choose between her daughters. But I could feel the choice forming in my sister's heart, the tug-of-war between loyalty to her fiancé's wealthy family, loyalty to our father, and the bond she had once shared with me. "I love you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're my sister."
Thinks no one knows about it, but I saw it once when I was with Michael's father. They keep it hidden, away from everything else.
My pulse hammered as I clutched the folder, my fingers trembling at the edges. She shook her head. "Proof. But not just about you, about all of us. About what Dad has been doing for years." Her voice broke into a whisper, one final plea. "Please, be careful." The folder felt heavier than the journal, heavier than all the secrets I had uncovered so far. Because unlike whispered warnings and faded letters, this wasn't just history. This was evidence someone alive had wanted to keep buried. And as I stared down at the folder in my lap, a chill ran through me. Whatever was inside could destroy more than just my trust in my father. It could destroy everything. My sister had handed me a hidden file, and with it, the key to secrets my father never intended anyone to see. The file revealed my father sold more than money. He sold me. I sat alone in my room, the manila folder spread across my desk like a crime scene. My sister had pressed it into my hands with trembling fingers, her whispered warning still clinging to the air. I thought I was prepared. I thought I had already seen the worst of what my father could do, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found inside. The first page was a financial statement, stamped and signed by a law firm I recognized from billboards around town. At first, it looked like a standard loan agreement, borrowing against assets, promising repayment. But as my eyes scanned the lines, I froze. There was my name, written in block letters, not as a cosigner, not as a beneficiary, but under a section titled Collateral. Collateral. My stomach turned. My father hadn't just emptied my college fund. He had tied me, my future, my name, my very existence to his debts. If he defaulted, it wasn't just money they could claim, it was me. My records, my accounts, my credit, my independence. He had put me on paper as if I were nothing more than property he could trade to secure his other daughter's future. My vision blurred with tears, the black ink bleeding into shadows. I turned the page, desperate to prove myself wrong, but each folder shut, but the papers inside rattled like bones, refusing to be silenced. My chest ached with something deeper than anger. It was grief. Because this wasn't just financial betrayal. It was love gutted, trust mutilated. My father hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen the belief that I mattered to him. The house felt heavier now, suffocating, every wall pressing closer with secrets. I thought of my mother, her silence that night when I confronted her. I thought of my sister, her tears when she admitted she hadn't known everything. And now I knew why. Because the truth wasn't just shameful, it was monstrous. I pressed my fists to my eyes, trying to hold back the sobs, but they broke free anyway. I cried until my throat was raw, until my body felt hollow, until all that was left was a trembling resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I would crumble under the weight of betrayal. They thought I would do what my mother had done. Stay quiet, accept the scraps, pretend loyalty was more important than dignity. But I wasn't her. I opened the folder again, forcing myself to study every line, every date, every signature. I memorized the patterns. I burned the proof into my mind. If he had turned me into collateral, then I would turn him into evidence. For years, my father had built his image on respect, on pride, on the illusion of being a good man. But illusions crumble in the light, and I was done living in his shadow. The timing was perfect. The family was planning another gathering, this time the formal wedding announcement. The guest list was even larger than the engagement party, with relatives, business partners, and local leaders all invited to celebrate the union of two powerful families. I would be there, and I wouldn't stay silent. I could already see it in my mind. The tables draped in white, the champagne glasses glistening, the laughter ringing hollow as speeches began. And then me, standing, folder in hand, exposing the man who had stolen my future and traded it away like a bargaining chip. The thought made my pulse race. I was terrified. Terrified of the fallout, terrified of what my father would do once the mask was ripped away. But fear had no place left to live inside.
A dripped light like casting the room in a golden glow. Tables were dressed in ivory linens, polished silverware gleaming on. Guests in their finest clothes clinked champagne glasses, laughter weaving through the air like music. To anyone else, it was a perfect night, the kind of evening people photographed for glossy magazines and framed in their. But to me, the glitter felt like glass shards. Every sparkling light reminded me of what it had cost. My future. My dreams. The folder of documents, tucked tightly into my purse, felt like a weight strapped to it. Each page burning through the fabric as if screaming to be seen. I watched my father from across the room. His chest was puffed out, his smile wide and practiced. He moved from guest to guest, shaking hands, patting shoulders, raising his glass with effortless charm. He looked like a man who had it all. A daughter engaged into wealth, a family rising higher, a legacy secured. No one saw the truth behind his eyes, but I did. My mother hovered at his side, her smile brittle, her hands clasped so tightly I thought her knuckles might shatter. My sister, radiant in a soft pink gown, glowed under the adoring gazes of friends and relatives. And standing beside her was Michael, her fiancé, his arm draped proudly around her waist, his smile polite but calculating. The perfect and me, the only one who knew it was painted in stolen ink. I sat at a table near the back, my hands trembling under the linen cloth as I traced the edges of the envelope inside my purse. I had rehearsed this moment over and over in my head, standing up when the toasts began, unzipping my bag, pulling out the documents, reading the truth aloud, watching the golden glow collapse into silence and chaos. But now, surrounded by laughter and joy, I felt my chest tighten. Could I really do it? Could I destroy my sister's day, rip the floor out from beneath her happiness, all to expose the man who had betrayed me? Would I be saving myself or condemning her? The conflict tore through me like fire and ice. My mind screamed that this was justice, that silence would chain me. Twisted the story, painted me as the jealous daughter trying to ruin her sister's happiness. What if I destroyed everything and still ended up with nothing? I clutched the folder to my chest, my sobs echoing against the tiled walls. For so long I had believed my father's words when he said I was his pride, his future. Now I was nothing but collateral, a name scribbled onto papers without consent. And tonight, I had to decide whether to stay silent, as my mother had, or to risk everything and speak. I wiped my face, steadied my breath, and turned toward the door.
I hadn't decided yet, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden in that bathroom forever. Just as I reached for the handle, voices drifted through the wall. The restroom was adjacent to a side hallway, and the sound of men talking carried easily in the quiet. I froze. One voice was smooth, commanding, familiar. Michael's father. "She still doesn't know," he said, his tone laced with smug certainty. My heart stopped. Another man murmured agreement, but it was Michael's father who continued. His words slipped through the wall like venom. "She still doesn't know what else we took." The folder nearly slipped from my hands. What else? I pressed my ear closer to the wall, my pulse roaring in my ears. The men's voices faded as they moved farther down the hall, their words muffled beyond recognition. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. My father hadn't just stolen my future. My sister's fiancé's family hadn't just accepted the deal. They had taken more. Something I hadn't yet uncovered. Something still hidden. The glittering hall, the laughter, the toasts. It all blurred before my eyes as dread flooded me. If they had taken more, what was left for me to lose? And how much darker was the truth than I had ever imagined? If there was more, I had to know, even if it destroyed me. The words I overheard at the wedding announcement echoed in my skull long after the laughter and music dulled into background noise. She still doesn't know what else we... They played on a loop, gnawing at me, louder than the clinking glasses, sharper than the applause. I tried to push them away, but I couldn't. Back at home that night, I locked my bedroom door and spread out every paper, every file, every scrap of evidence. Desperate. And there it was. 3 more documents, each stamped with banks I'd never set foot in. Each naming me as the borrower. Each carrying debts I had never agreed to. Amounts so large they made my head spin. My name was tethered to thousands upon thousands of dollars in loans, and my father's signature sat neatly beside mine. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was ink on paper. It was my future chained to numbers I hadn't chosen. It was my father, the man who once carried me on his shoulders, turning me into collateral. I couldn't breathe. I fell back against the headboard, clutching the papers to my chest as sobs broke free. My body shook with the weight of it. I thought losing my college fund was enough pain to carry, but this was annihilation. No college, no career, no independence. Debt collectors would see my name, not his. Creditors would destroy my reputation, not his. And he had smiled through it all, raising a glass to toast my sister's future while trading away mine. I don't know how long I sat there, broken and hollow, the documents spread around me like shattered glass. But when I heard a soft knock at my door, I quickly shoved everything beneath my blanket. My mother's voice came through, low, tired. "Can I come in?" I hesitated. She already knew. Some part of me had always suspected she knew, but hearing her say it aloud, that was something else entirely. I opened the door. She slipped inside, her eyes darting toward the blanket that covered the papers. Her shoulders sagged with the weight of secrets she hadn't spoken. "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off before she could spin the same old lines. "Don't lie to me anymore." Her lips trembled. She sat at the edge of my bed, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I never wanted you to find out like this." "Find out what?" I snapped, my voice cracking. "That my entire future is gone? That my name is ruined before I've even had a chance to live? That my own parents sold me out like I was nothing?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I had no sympathy left to give. "Your father was desperate," she whispered. "We were drowning. The debts were piling up. The business was collapsing. He didn't see another way." "And you?" I asked bitterly. "What's your excuse? Did you see another way?"
Did what I had to for this. Sometimes we sacrifice one to save the rest. I stood, unable to sit beside her another second. My chest burned with rage. "You sacrificed me." "Don't dress it up as family." Her tears flowed faster now, but I didn't care. I walked to my desk, pulled out the hidden folder from beneath the blanket, and spread it wide open in front of her. The signatures, the loans, the evidence of betrayal. Her hands shook as she reached out, her voice breaking. "If you take this outside this house, if you show anyone—" "I will," I interrupted, my resolve sharpening like a blade. "I'll go public. I'll show the world what he's done, what you've both done.
The words left my mouth before I could stop them, but I meant every one. I couldn't carry this truth alone anymore. Silence was killing me. And that's when I heard it, the sharp intake of breath from the doorway. I spun around. My father stood there, framed in the hall light. His face was shadowed, but his eyes burned like fire. He had heard everything. His silence was more terrifying than his rage, and in that instant I knew, if I exposed him, he would destroy me before I could ever destroy him. The night I exposed my father, I knew I was burning the last bridge. The air in the reception hall was thick with perfume, candlelight, and expectation. My sister's engagement celebration had stretched into a second night of feasting, laughter, and endless speeches. Guests toasted again and again, glasses clinking, smiles plastered across their faces. To them, this was joy. To me, it was a masquerade built on the ashes of my future. I stood near the back, clutching the folder of evidence so tightly my knuckles whitened. My pulse thundered in my ears. For days I had rehearsed this moment, every word, every reveal. Tonight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about truth. If I stayed silent, I was complicit in my own erasure. If I spoke, I risked tearing apart the fragile image of family that still lingered like smoke after a fire. When my father rose to give yet another toast, my decision crystallized. He stood tall, wine glass raised high, his voice smooth and confident as he praised family loyalty and sacrifice. His words dripped with irony, poison disguised as pride. That was when I stepped forward. The room shifted as I moved to the center, my heels clicking, yet steady enough to hold the paper aloft. "This," I said, "is the bank statement showing my college fund was emptied 3 weeks before this engagement party. The exact amount spent matches the bills for this celebration." A ripple of murmurs swept the hall. My sister's face paled. I pulled out another paper. "And this is a loan agreement. My name is on it. My signature forged by the man who's been toasting all of you tonight." Gasps echoed. People leaned closer. My father's jaw clenched. I spread the papers across the table nearest me, each one a shard of betrayal laid bare under the chandelier light. "These are 3 more loans taken out in my name. Debt that will follow me for years. Debt I never agreed to. Debt my father tied to me without my knowledge." The hall was no longer golden. It was silent, brittle, the weight of truth pressing down on everyone. My father slammed his glass on the table, his face red with rage. "That's enough!" he roared. His voice cracked the air, but it was too late. The evidence was already out. My sister staggered forward, staring at the documents. "Dad, tell me this isn't true," she whispered, her voice breaking. My mother wept quietly in the corner, her tears confirming what words could not. Michael's family exchanged sharp glances, their perfect smiles shattering into fury and humiliation. His father stood, pointing a finger at mine. "You involved us in this? You used our celebration to cover your theft?" The room erupted, guests whispering, relatives demanding answers, the polished image of respect and wealth collapsing into chaos. And there I was, standing at the center, my hands trembling but my spine unbroken. My father lunged toward me, his voice booming. "You don't know what you've done. You've destroyed this family." But I lifted my chin, tears streaming down my face as I answered, "No. You destroyed it the moment you sold me off like property. Tonight, I just refused to stay silent." The words hung in the air like a bell, tolling the death of everything we had pretended to be. My sister sobbed, the engagement ring on her finger suddenly heavy. My mother collapsed into a chair, her shoulders shaking. My father's fury burned hotter than I had ever seen, but beneath it I saw fear, the fear of a man stripped bare. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless daughter, I was the witness. I was the night as I walked away from the glittering hall, the folder of documents still pressed against my chest. I felt the finality of it all. I had burned the last bridge. There was no going back. But in the ashes, there was a strange, bittersweet lightness, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I had reclaimed something greater than what had been stolen. If your own family stole your future, would you dare take it back, even if it meant losing them forever? If this story shook you, let me know in the comments. Would you have exposed the truth, even if it cost you your family? Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss more real, first-person stories filled with suspense and betrayal. Share this video with someone who needs the courage to take their future back, and drop "Take It Back"
below if you're with her.